The blizzard didn't just bring the cold, it brought death knocking at Millen Chen's door. For 3 days, the wind had screamed like a banshee across the Colorado wilderness. For 3 days, Millen had nursed her daughter, Leanne, whose small body was burning up with a fever that none of her traditional herbs could break. Millen was a widow, a stranger in a strange land, and now she was trapped. That's when she heard it. Not the wind, but something else. The desperate, stumbling sound of a horse fighting its way through knee-deep snow. The animal's breathing was a ragged saw, cutting through the storm's howl, and then a sound that made the blood in her veins turn to ice. A heavy, final thud. The unmistakable sound of a body hitting the frozen earth just on the other side of her porch. Millen grabbed the rifle she always kept loaded. Her heart hammered against her ribs as she pressed herself flat against the cabin wall, peering through a small patch she'd cleared on the frost-covered window. Outside, a man was sprawled in the snow. He was huge. Even half buried in white, she could see the raw size of him. He wore a dark coat and a gun belt that hung low on his hips, the kind of rig that marked him as trouble, the kind of man decent folks crossed the street to avoid. He was danger, wrapped in a snowstorm, delivered right to her doorstep. From the small bed near the fireplace, Leanne let out a weak cough. Millen's heart clenched so tight she could barely breathe. Her daughter, her 6-year-old light, was fading. The herbs she'd carried all the way from her homeland were almost gone, and they weren't working anyway. The only doctor was in Crimson Falls, 20 miles of impassable mountain terrain away. They were alone. Utterly and completely alone. Then came a knock. It was weak, barely a whisper against the roaring wind, but it echoed through the small cabin like a gunshot. "Please," a voice rasped. It was rough, torn apart by cold and exhaustion. "I know you're in there. Just need shelter, till the storm passes." Millen's knuckles were white on the rifle stock. 3 years she'd been a widow out here, 3 years of hard lessons, and the hardest one was this: you don't trust strangers, especially not the white men who looked at her with a mix of pity and suspicion, like she was some strange creature who didn't belong. "Go away," she called out, her voice a steel blade. "There's nothing for you here." There was a pause. Then, "My horse is down. I'm hurt. Won't make it through the night." The voice cracked, followed by a low groan of pain that the wind couldn't quite swallow. Millen's conscience, a thing her late husband Way had always said was too soft for this country, began to pull at her. Through the window, she watched the man struggle, somehow getting to his feet, swaying like a great tree about to fall, and where he had been lying, the pure white snow was stained a horrifying, brilliant crimson. He was bleeding, badly. "Please don't come inside," she said again, her voice louder this time, sharper. "I have a sick child and a loaded gun. Whatever you're running from, whatever trouble you're in, take it somewhere else." The stranger lifted his head. For a heart-stopping second, his eyes met hers through the frosted glass. Even from a distance, through the swirling snow, she saw something in them that wasn't just desperation. It was something deeper, something that felt like recognition. "I'm not here to hurt you," he said, his voice quiet, but carrying with an unnatural clarity. "My name is Wade Morrison, and I know who you are, Millen Chen." The world stopped. The wind, the snow, the fire in the hearth, it all just vanished. Her name. This dangerous, bleeding stranger knew her name. Ice flooded her veins. How? Why? In Crimson Falls she was a ghost, a whisper, the strange Chinese widow, the woman who knew the old ways, whose knowledge of herbs made people both afraid and resentful. Most people left her alone, tucked away on her isolated homestead. They didn't seek her out. But this man, this Wade Morrison, he had come for her. "Mama?" Leanne's fevered whimper cut through Millen's shock. It brought her crashing back to the cold, terrifying reality of the cabin. Her daughter was dying. And maybe, just maybe, salvation had come dressed as a killer. Her hands trembled as she watched Wade Morrison struggle to stay on his feet. The red stain in the snow was growing, a gruesome flower blooming in the blizzard. He was dying out there. She was trapped between two impossible choices. Let a dangerous man into her home, or let him die on her doorstep while her daughter burned alive from the inside out. "How do you know my name?" she yelled through the thick wooden door, her rifle still up, still aimed. "Your husband." Wade's reply was weaker now, strained. "Wei Chen. He saved my life once. He told me if I was ever in real trouble, his wife up in the mountains. She was the kind of woman who could work miracles." Millen's breath hitched. Wei. Her Wei had been gone for 3 years, killed in that mine collapse that took 12 other men. He rarely spoke of his life before she came to America, of the years he spent wandering, but he had never, not once, mentioned a man named Morrison. "My husband never mentioned you," she said, but even to her own ears, a sliver of doubt had crept into her voice. Wade let out a bitter laugh that dissolved into a pained cough. "He knew me by a different name back then, before I became what I am now. Look, ma'am, I'm not going to last much longer out here, and from what I hear about your little girl, you need what I have just as much as I need shelter." "What are you talking about?" Millen demanded. "Medicine," he gasped. "In my saddlebags. Real medicine. From a doctor in Denver. Fever reducers, tonics, things that can save her." His voice grew tight, desperate. "But if I die out here, Leanne dies too." The words hit Millen like a physical blow. Medicine. Real American medicine. Not the ginseng and willow bark she had been praying over for days. Leanne was so weak. Millen could see it, could feel her daughter slipping away with every shallow, ragged breath. Through the window, she saw Wade's legs finally give out. He crumpled back into the snow, a dark heap in the endless white. "Mama?" Leanne's voice, so small, so fragile. "Who's outside?" Millen turned. Her daughter was trying to sit up, her face a pale moon, except for the 2 bright red spots of fever burning on her cheeks. "It's just a traveler, sweetheart. You go back to sleep." But Leanne was staring at the window, her eyes wide with that strange, knowing perception that children sometimes have. "He's hurt bad, isn't he, Mama?" Yes, he was. Every instinct, every hard lesson this country had taught her, screamed at Millen to keep the door bolted. This man was poison. Letting him in would be letting death into her home. But Leanne was already dying. Slowly, quietly, right before her eyes. Another wet, rattling cough from the bed sealed the deal. It was a choice between a certain death and a possible one. "If you so much as look at my daughter the wrong way," Millen called out, her voice shaking but loud enough to carry, "I will put a bullet through your heart. I swear it." "Understood," came the simple, faint reply from the snow. With trembling hands, Millen unbarred the door. The wind blasted into the cabin, a furious, icy wave, driving snow and cold into their small sanctuary. Wade was hunched on her porch, one hand pressed hard against his side, his face a mask of pain. Up close, he was even more terrifying than she'd imagined. He was a mountain of a man, tall and broad-shouldered, with a hard, weathered face that told stories of violence and rough living. When he finally lifted his head, and his eyes met hers, she saw they were the color of a thunderhead, a turbulent, stormy gray. But then his gaze shifted past her to the small figure in the bed, and the storm in his eyes gentled. Just for a second. But she saw it, a flicker of something soft, something human. It was enough to make her grip on the rifle relax just a fraction. "She's burning up," he said, his voice a low rumble. "For 3 days," Millen whispered. "I've tried everything." "The medicine," Wade grunted, nodding toward his dead horse, now just a dark shape in the swirling snow. "In the saddlebags." But I'll need your help." Against her better judgment, against every screaming alarm bell in her head, Milan propped her rifle by the door. She moved to his side to support him. The moment she touched him, she felt the heat of his own fever burning through his thick coat. He was sick, too. Together, they staggered out into the blizzard. The horse was gone, its life spent getting this man to her door, but the leather saddlebags were there, half buried in a drift. "The right pouch," Wade directed, leaning on her so heavily she thought her knees would buckle. Milan's frozen fingers fumbled with the clasp. Inside, she found not trail rations or ammunition, but a collection of small, corked glass bottles. They looked professional, clean, like something from a real doctor's office. The blue bottle, Wade instructed, his breath coming in ragged pants. 2 drops, in warm water, every 4 hours. The white powder, for her chest. Milan stared at the bottles in her hand. It was real. He hadn't been lying. "Where did you get these?" "Denver," he managed. "Business." They fought their way back to the cabin, Milan practically dragging him the last few feet. She got him into a chair by the fire, then rushed to Leanne's side. Her daughter's eyes fluttered open as Milan gently lifted her head. "Is that the man who's hurt, Mama?" "Yes, sweetheart. He brought you medicine." Leanne's gaze drifted to Wade, who was slumped in the chair, his head lolling. "He looks sad," she said with a child's simple clarity. Only when Leanne had swallowed the precious drops of medicine did Milan turn her full attention back to the stranger. His coat was soaked through with blood. She knew, with a sinking feeling, what she had to do. She helped him out of the heavy coat, and the smell of blood hit her, coppery and sharp. The wound was just below his ribs on his left side, a neat, dark hole, a bullet wound. "This needs to be cleaned and stitched," she said, her voice all business, pushing down the fear. "You don't have to do that," he said, his voice weak. "Yes, I do," she replied flatly. "You brought medicine for my daughter. I won't have you bleeding to death in my chair." She gathered her supplies, clean cloths, her sewing needle, strong thread, and a bottle of whiskey Way had left behind, untouched for 3 years. As she set to work cleaning the wound, Wade stayed unnervingly silent, his jaw clenched tight. "The bullet's still in there," she murmured, more to herself than to him. "This is going to hurt." "Most things worth doing usually do," he grit out. As she worked, probing the wound with sterilized tweezers, she found herself stealing glances at his face. The firelight softened the harsh lines, but the exhaustion and pain were carved deep. "You said Way saved your life," she said quietly, needing to fill the tense silence. 5 years ago. Wade's voice was tight, strained. "I was a different man then. Younger, a hell of a lot more foolish. Got myself into a bind over a mining claim. 3 men against me." He paused, taking a sharp breath as she probed deeper. "Way stepped in. He didn't even know me. He just stood between us. Said he had a wife waiting for him, and she'd worry if he didn't come home." He looked at her then, his gray eyes intense. "He talked about you like you were the sun and the moon, the most precious thing in the whole world." Milan's hand stilled for a moment. Her heart ached with the memory of him. They had wanted a family so desperately, and when they couldn't have children of their own, they found Leanne, a tiny orphan, left behind when cholera swept through a railroad camp. It was Way who had insisted they take her in, love her as their own. "He was a good man," she whispered. Her gaze hardened slightly, "which makes me wonder what a good man like Way would see in someone like you." She didn't try to soften the words. "Someone like me," he repeated, a bitter twist to his lips. "Don't play innocent with me, Mr. Morrison. I may live up here alone, but stories travel. I've heard whispers in town about a man they call the Hawk. They say he's a ghost with a gun. They don't give a man a name like that because he's gentle." Wade's smile was grim. "Stories have a way of getting bigger in the telling." So they're not true? She pressed. I'm saying, he said, his eyes locking with hers, that there's always more to the story than what gets told over whiskey in a saloon. With a final, careful twist, Millen pulled the chunk of lead free. It clattered into the small metal bowl with a sickening little sound. She cleaned the wound one last time, then began the steady work of stitching his flesh back together. Her hands, usually so skilled with delicate herbs, were surprisingly steady. "Why are you really here, Wade?" she asked, her voice low. "Way may have mentioned my name, but that doesn't explain why a man like you would ride into a blizzard, half dead, just to find my cabin." He was quiet for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. The only sounds were the crackle of the fire and the whistle of the wind. "Because I'm tired of running," he finally whispered, his voice raw. "And because he said if I ever truly wanted to find a different path, his wife would know the way. She'd know how to help a man start over." Millen tied off the final stitch, her work done. She sat back on her heels, looking at the man she had just saved. This dangerous, complicated man. "And you think I can do that?" she asked. He held her gaze, and for the first time she saw not a killer, not a gunslinger, but just a man at the very end of his rope. "I think," he said slowly, "you're the only chance I've got left." Outside, the storm howled. Inside, a different kind of storm was just beginning. Millen looked from the bleeding stranger in her chair to her sleeping daughter, whose life now depended on him. Then she looked at the bottles of medicine, a fragile promise sitting on her mantel. She was starting to understand a terrible truth about this land. Sometimes salvation and damnation wore the exact same face, and she had just invited both into her home. Millen woke before the sun, her senses instantly alert. The first thing she noticed was the silence. The wind had finally died. The second thing she noticed was the sound of Leanne's breathing. It was deep, even, steady. She scrambled to her daughter's bedside, her heart in her throat. She pressed her hand to Leanne's forehead. It was cool. The fever was gone. It had broken in the night. A wave of relief so powerful it made her dizzy washed over her. "How is she?" Wade's voice was a low whisper from the chair. He hadn't moved. She could tell by his posture that he hadn't slept either. He had been watching over them. "Better," Millen whispered back, her voice thick with emotion. "The fever's gone. Thank you. That medicine, it saved her life." "Just glad it worked," he said simply. She studied his profile in the faint, pre-dawn light filtering through the window. Even wounded and exhausted, there was a stillness about him, a coiled energy that was both unsettling and intriguing. "You should try to get some real sleep," she said. "You lost a lot of blood." Wade finally turned his head and opened his eyes. They were clear, watchful. "Not used to people worrying about my health, Mrs. Chen." "It's Millen," she corrected automatically. "And I'm not worried. I'm being practical. A dead man is no help with the chores when this snow clears." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "Practical. Wei said that about you. I can respect that." The snow had piled high against the cabin, drifting up over the windowsills. "We're going to be snowed in for days," she said, stating the obvious. "I can make a camp in your barn once I can move," he offered. "No." Her voice was firm, surprising even herself. "You'll stay here, in the warmth, until you're healed. I won't have a man's death on my conscience, practical or not." He just watched her for a long moment, his gray eyes seeming to see right through her. "Wei was right about you too," he said softly. "He said you had a quiet strength that put louder men to shame." "He always saw the best in people," she replied, a hint of sadness in her voice. "Including you, apparently." Wade's expression soured. "I didn't deserve his help back then. I was young, angry, looking for a fight in the bottom of every bottle." "What changed?" she asked, her curiosity getting the better of her. He was quiet again, his gaze drifting to the fire. "I killed a man," he said, his voice flat, devoid of emotion. "Not in a fair fight, not over a claim or an insult. I killed him because someone paid me to. And when it was done, I looked at my hands, and I finally saw what I'd become." A chill went through Milan that had nothing to do with the cold outside. "You're a killer for hire." It wasn't a question. His jaw tightened. "Was. I've been trying to leave that life behind for 2 years. It's not as easy as it sounds. The past has a long reach." "Why are you telling me this?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. "Because," he said, turning his piercing gaze back to her, "you deserve to know exactly what kind of man you've let into your home. You deserve to know the truth." She stood there, letting the terrible weight of his confession settle over her. A hired killer. The whispers in town hadn't even begun to tell the whole story. But she weighed that truth against what she had seen with her own eyes. The man who rode through a blizzard to bring medicine to a child he'd never met. The man who asked about Leanne's health before his own. The man who was now being brutally honest about the darkness in his past. "People can change," she said finally, the words feeling small and fragile in the quiet cabin. "Can they?" he asked, a bitter edge to his voice. "Or do they just get better at hiding what they really are?" She didn't have an answer for that. Instead, she moved to the stove, poured coffee into 2 tin cups, and carried one to him. "I think it depends," she said, handing him the cup. "It depends on whether they want to change or just want to escape the consequences." He took the cup, his fingers brushing hers. "And which one do you think I want, Milan?" "I think," she said, meeting his eyes, "if you only wanted to escape, you would have kept on running. You wouldn't have come here looking for redemption." They drank their coffee in a silence that was no longer tense, but filled with a new, unspoken understanding. "Mama?" Leanne's sleepy voice broke the spell. She was sitting up in bed, her eyes clear and bright. The fever was truly gone. "How do you feel, sweetheart?" Milan rushed to her side, fussing over her blankets. "Hungry," Leanne declared. Then she noticed Wade still sitting in the chair. "You're still here." "Storm's not over yet," Wade replied, his voice gentle. "Is it all right if I stay a little longer?" Leanne studied him with the serious scrutiny of a 6-year-old. "Are you still hurt?" "Some," he admitted. "But your mama fixed me up pretty good. She's good at fixing things." "She fixed my doll when its arm came off," Leanne announced with complete confidence, as if this settled the matter. As Milan made a simple breakfast of oatmeal and dried fruit, an extraordinary thing happened. Leanne, usually so shy around strangers, began chattering away to Wade. She told him about her doll, about the pictures she drew, about the funny-shaped rock she found by the creek last summer. And Wade listened. He didn't just pretend to listen. He really listened, asking questions, his gruff exterior melting away to reveal something tender and patient beneath. "Do you have any children?" Leanne asked him bluntly. His expression shuddered, became distant. "No," he said quietly. "Never thought I was the type to be a father." "Why not?" He looked from Leanne to Milan, and his answer was raw with honesty. "Because fathers are supposed to protect their children, and I've spent most of my life being the kind of man other fathers protect their children from." Leanne considered this with a profound seriousness. "But you protected me," she said. "You brought the medicine." Wade looked genuinely stunned, as if that simple fact had never occurred to him. I guess I did," he admitted, his voice rough. "Mama says sometimes we don't know why we do good things," Leanne said wisely, parroting something Milan had once told her. "We just do them because it feels right inside." Over that simple breakfast, something shifted in the little cabin. The danger and weariness between them didn't disappear, but it eased. It made room for something new to grow. A fragile, tentative trust. But Melan didn't miss the way Wade still watched the windows, or how he always positioned his chair so he could see the door. Whatever he was running from, it was still out there. The blizzard had only given them a temporary reprieve. The storm finally broke on the fourth day, revealing a world blanketed in a thick, pristine layer of white. The silence was absolute. "That trail won't be passable for another day or two," Wade observed. He was standing on the porch, breathing in the clean, cold air. In the past few days, despite his injury, he'd made himself useful, splitting kindling, mending a broken latch, his movements economical and precise. "Long enough for you to decide what you're going to do next," Melan replied, joining him. "When someone does make it up here, they'll recognize you." "Worried about your reputation, Melan?" There was a teasing note in his voice. Her expression remained serious. "I'm worried about Leanne. There's a man in town, Aldrich Harrison. He's been looking for any excuse to have me declared an unfit mother so he can take custody of her. He wants this land. Having a known gunslinger living in my home would be all the ammunition he needs." Wade's face darkened at the name. "Aldrich Harrison. Owns the big mining operation, right? He's had his eye on this land for years, hasn't he?" "He's been pressuring me to sell ever since Wade died," she said, her jaw tight. "He doesn't think a Chinese woman has any business holding a claim like this." Wade looked out over the vast snow-covered valley that was her home. "What if it wasn't just one woman holding it?" he said quietly. Before Melan could even begin to process what he meant by that, a sound cut through the crisp air. Horses, 3 of them, their hooves muffled by the snow but getting closer. Melan's blood ran cold. She recognized the lead horse. "That's Dr. Finch." Then her heart sank into her stomach. And Sheriff Brody, and Harrison himself. Wade's hand instinctively moved to the gun belt he'd started wearing again. "I should go." "Where?" she hissed. "There's nowhere to run. Get inside. Sit in the chair by the fire. Let me do the talking." The 3 riders pulled up in front of the cabin. Dr. Finch, a kindly old man, looked mostly relieved. Sheriff Brody, young and ambitious, looked suspicious. But it was Aldrich Harrison who dominated the scene. He was tall and silver-haired, dressed in an expensive wool coat that seemed out of place in the rugged wilderness. Power radiated off him like heat from a stove. "Mrs. Chen!" Dr. Finch called out. "Thank heavens, we were worried sick." "We're fine, Doctor," Melan said, keeping her voice steady. "Nevertheless," Harrison interjected, his voice smooth but dripping with condescension, "this storm proves my point precisely. This arrangement is entirely unsuitable. A woman of your background has no business trying to raise a child in such isolation." "This is our home, Mr. Harrison," she said, her chin high. "Lot of tracks here, Mrs. Chen," Sheriff Brody noted, his eyes narrowed, scanning the area around the cabin. "Looks like you had some company." "A traveler," Melan said, her heart pounding. "He took shelter from the storm. He was badly injured." "What kind of traveler?" Harrison's sharp eyes fixed on her. "The kind who needed a doctor," Melan shot back. "Perhaps you should examine him, Dr. Finch." She led them inside. Wade was sitting where she'd told him, a blanket pulled up to his chin, his eyes closed as if he were asleep. "Good Lord!" Dr. Finch exclaimed, rushing to his side. "This man's been shot!" "A hunting accident," Melan lied quickly. Too quickly. "Who is he?" Sheriff Brody demanded, his hand resting on the butt of his pistol. "He says his name is Wayne Miller," Melan said, the false name feeling clumsy on her tongue. "Strange," Harrison mused, circling the chair like a wolf. "A man travels all this way from Kansas, gets himself shot, and just happens to stumble upon the cabin of the most notorious widow in 3 counties. He leaned closer, his eyes missing nothing. "You know, Sheriff, there's something familiar about this man." The walls of the small cabin felt like they were closing in. "Mr. Miller isn't dangerous," Leanne piped up suddenly from her bed. "He helped me feel better, and he tells good stories." Dr. Finch gave Leanne a warm smile, but Sheriff Brody just frowned. You said he was delirious from his injury, Mrs. Chen. How could he have been telling stories? Harrison wasn't listening. He was studying Wade's face intently. Sheriff, he said slowly, doesn't this man remind you of someone? Look at that scar, just there, above his left eyebrow. A slow, terrible recognition dawned on the sheriff's face. Now that you mention it, I've seen that face on a wanted poster, Harrison declared, his voice triumphant. In the federal marshal's office, I believe we are looking at Wade Morrison. He spat the name out. They call him the Hawk. The sheriff took a half step back. The Hawk? There's a $500 bounty on his head, dead or alive. The name hung in the air, thick and deadly. Dr. Finch went pale. Sheriff Brody's gun was out of its holster in a flash. Mr. Morrison, Harrison said with cold, cruel satisfaction, I know you're awake. Slowly, Wade opened his eyes. They were no longer gentle. They were the color of cold steel. Been a while, Sheriff, Wade said, his voice a low growl. Arrest this man immediately, Harrison commanded. You can't take him, Millen heard herself say, stepping between the sheriff's gun and Wade. All eyes snapped to her. He's my patient. He's injured and under my care. She drew herself up, finding a strength she didn't know she possessed. As the only medical practitioner for 20 miles, I have the authority to determine when he is fit to be moved. Harrison's eyes narrowed into slits. Are you obstructing a lawful arrest, Mrs. Chen? I'm saying I will not let you murder a man in my home by dragging him out into the cold before he's healed, she stated, her voice ringing with defiance. Millen, don't, Wade said, and she could see the pain in his eyes. I'm not worth this. You're a man who brought medicine that saved my child's life, she replied, her gaze locked on Harrison. Right now, that's all that matters. How touching, Harrison sneered. Sheriff, I am ordering you to arrest them both. Mrs. Chen for harboring a known fugitive, and Morrison for the bounty. She can answer for her crimes right alongside his. The blood drained from Millen's face. Arrest her? What would happen to Leanne? There's just one problem with your plan, Harrison, Wade said. With a slow, deliberate movement, he pushed himself up in the chair. The blanket fell away. His gun belt, which he had strapped on under the blanket, was right there, within easy reach. Despite the fresh stitches in his side, he was suddenly, electrifyingly, the most dangerous man in the room. The problem, Wade continued, his voice dangerously calm, is that you're threatening the woman who saved my life. He looked at Harrison, and the friendly stranger was gone. In his place was the Hawk. And I take that kind of thing personally. The air in the cabin was so thick you could cut it with a knife. Sheriff Brody's gun was still raised, but his hand was trembling slightly. Nobody needs to die here today, Wade said, his voice dropping even lower. Sheriff, you seem like a reasonable man. Do you really want to start a gunfight in a room with a 6-year-old girl? Sheriff Brody's eyes flicked nervously toward Leanne, who had buried her face in Millen's side. I don't want any trouble, Morrison. But you're a wanted man. The law is the law. Stop it! Millen cried, stepping forward, placing herself directly in the line of fire. This is my home. My daughter is terrified. I will not have this violence here. Enough of this nonsense! Harrison's patience finally snapped. His face was a mask of fury. Sheriff, arrest them both now, or by God, I'll ride to Denver and find a man who will. You'll find a man who will what exactly, Mr. Harrison? A new voice cut through the tension. A voice from the doorway. Everyone spun around. A tall, lean man stood silhouetted against the bright snow outside. He wore a long duster coat and a flat-brimmed hat. A silver star was pinned to his chest. Deputy U.S. Marshal Grant, Dr. Finch breathed, a wave of relief in his voice. Thank God. The U.S. Marshal stepped into the cabin, his calm eyes taking in the entire scene in a single, sweeping glance. The sheriff's drawn gun, Harrison's apoplectic face, Millen standing protectively in front of Leanne, and Wade, poised like a coiled snake in the chair. "Harrison," Marshal Grant said, his tone polite but edged with ice. "An interesting way to conduct official business, terrorizing a widow and her child." "Marshal," Harrison sputtered, his arrogant demeanor instantly deflating. "You don't understand. We've discovered Mrs. Chen has been harboring a dangerous fugitive." Grant's eyes finally settled on Wade. "Is that a fact? Well, well. Wade Morrison. You certainly do get around." "Marshal," Wade acknowledged with a curt, respectful nod. Grant stepped fully into the cabin, his presence seeming to suck all the aggression out of the room. "Sheriff, you can put that away. I'll handle this." He turned his cool gaze on Harrison. "Actually, Aldrich, there appears to be a slight complication with your citizen's arrest." "What kind of complication?" Harrison demanded. "The kind," Grant said, reaching slowly into his duster, "where Mr. Morrison here isn't technically a fugitive anymore." He pulled out a folded, official-looking document and held it up. "Presidential pardon," Grant announced to the stunned room. "Signed and sealed 3 days ago. It's conditional, of course, but it's valid." Millen felt her knees go weak. "A pardon?" Harrison's face went from red to a blotchy purple. That's impossible. He's a killer." "It was a classified arrangement," Grant said mildly. "You didn't have a need to know. Turns out, Mr. Morrison has been providing some very valuable information to the federal government about certain criminal enterprises." He let his eyes linger on Harrison for just a moment too long. "But the man he killed," Harrison fumed. "He murdered Jedediah Kane in cold blood." "Actually," Grant continued smoothly, "the late Mr. Kane was the head of a rather large counterfeiting ring that was causing the Treasury Department no end of headaches. In fact, Mr. Morrison did the government a rather large favor by putting him out of business, permanently." Millen stared at Wade, her mind reeling. He hadn't just been a killer for hire. He'd been something else entirely. A government agent? A spy? It was too much to comprehend. "Even if this is legitimate," Harrison spat, refusing to give up, "it doesn't excuse her." He pointed a trembling finger at Millen. "She knowingly harbored a man she believed to be a dangerous criminal, in the presence of a child." Marshal Grant's voice went sharp. "Mrs. Chen, did you know Mr. Morrison was wanted by federal law enforcement when you took him in?" Millen met the marshal's gaze without flinching. "No, Marshal. I knew he had a dangerous past, but I did not know about any federal warrants." "Then she is guilty of nothing more than Christian charity," Grant declared, his voice booming in the small cabin, "which, the last I checked, isn't a crime in the state of Colorado." He turned back to Harrison, his eyes hard as nails. "As for your concerns about Mrs. Chen's fitness as a mother, those are civil matters. You'll have to pursue them through the proper channels. Now, I suggest you and the sheriff take your leave. You're upsetting the child." Defeated and humiliated, Harrison stormed out of the cabin, with Sheriff Brody trailing sheepishly behind him. After they had gone, Marshal Grant lingered. "The pardon is conditional, Wade," he said, his voice serious. "The condition is you stay out of trouble. No more gunslinging." He looked from Wade to Millen, then to Leanne, who was still clinging to her mother. "And a respectable widow like yourself, Mrs. Chen," Grant added, a knowing look in his eye. "Living way out here alone with a man of Mr. Morrison's reputation. Well, that's not going to win you any popularity contests in town." He walked to the door and paused. "Harrison isn't going to forget this. He's a vindictive man with a long memory. He'll be back, and next time he'll use the law. You two might want to think about how to make this arrangement look a little more respectable." With that cryptic piece of advice, he tipped his hat and was gone. The blizzard outside had ended, but Millen knew the storm in their lives was just getting started. 3 weeks passed. 3 weeks of impossible, fragile peace. Wade, she refused to call him by his other name, Colt, had stayed. His wound healed slowly, but each morning he seemed to find a new reason to postpone his departure. A fence needed mending. The woodpile was low. The barn roof had a leak. They were excuses, and they both knew it. Meline stood on her porch, watching the late afternoon sun paint the snow-covered mountains in shades of pink and gold. She heard Leanne's laughter, bright and clear in the cold air. "Mama, look, Wade's helping me build a snow fort." She watched them, a strange ache in her chest. The feared gunslinger, the hawk, was on his hands and knees, patiently helping her daughter pack snow into a wall. In the past few weeks, she had seen the man behind the reputation. She had seen his gentleness, his quiet humor, his fierce protectiveness of them both. The cabin, once so empty and silent after Wade's death, was now filled with life. It felt like a home again. The sound of an approaching horse broke her reverie. It was Dr. Finch, and the worried look on his face told her the peace was over. "Millen," he said, dismounting, his voice grave, "I'm afraid I have bad news." Wade had seen him coming and was now standing beside her, his posture instantly wary. "It's Harrison," the doctor said, not bothering with pleasantries. "He's filed a formal petition with the territorial governor. He's claiming your living arrangement poses a grave danger to Leanne's moral development." The words were like a punch to the gut. "He's requesting a formal custody hearing," Dr. Finch continued, his kind eyes full of pity, "in 2 weeks, in Denver." Denver, a 3-day journey in the best of weather. In the dead of winter, it was nearly impossible. "If you don't appear," the doctor said gently, "he wins by default. He'll be granted temporary custody of Leanne." "What exactly is he claiming?" Wade's voice was a low, dangerous growl. "Moral corruption. Improper supervision," Dr. Finch recited grimly. "Essentially, he's claiming that Mrs. Chen's association with you, a known killer, makes her an unfit mother." Wade was silent for a long moment. When he finally spoke, his voice was hollow. "And he's probably right," he said quietly. "I should leave. Tonight. I'll disappear. Take the problem with me." "Absolutely not." Millen's response was immediate and fierce, surprising them all. "You are not running away. This is not your fault. This is about Harrison's greed." "Perhaps," Dr. Finch said, clearing his throat nervously, "there is another solution." He looked from Millen's determined face to Wade's grim one. "A marriage." The word hung in the cold, still air. "I beg your pardon?" Millen managed to say, her mind struggling to catch up. "It's a matter of legal standing," the doctor explained, speaking quickly. "Harrison's entire petition rests on the impropriety of your current arrangement. As your husband, Mr. Morrison would be Leanne's legal stepfather. His presence here would be perfectly legitimate. It would gut Harrison's case before it even reached the judge." He looked at them apologetically. "It is, of course, a marriage of convenience." "Who said anything about convenience?" Wade's voice was quiet, but it cut through the doctor's practical explanation. He turned, stepping closer to Millen, his stormy gray eyes searching her face. "Millen," he said, his voice low and for her alone. "I've watched you these past weeks. I've seen how you care for Leanne, how you fought for this home. You are the strongest, bravest woman I have ever met. I know my past. I know the danger that follows me like a shadow. But these last 3 weeks, living here with you and Leanne, they've been the happiest, most peaceful weeks of my entire life." Her heart was hammering. She couldn't breathe. "What about Leanne?" she whispered. "A life with 2 parents," Wade answered without hesitation. "2 parents who love her and would die to protect her." "This is insane," she said, but her voice lacked conviction. It felt like the world was spinning around her. "Is it?" he asked softly. "Is it more insane than letting a man like Harrison tear your family apart and steal everything you've worked for?" He took her hand, his calloused fingers wrapping around hers. "I'm not asking you to marry me to solve a legal problem, Millen. I'm asking you because I love you. I love Leanne, and I love this life we've started to build together, right here." The words hit her with the force of a physical blow. "You love me." "I think," he said, a faint, nervous smile on his lips. "I've been in love with you since the moment you stood between me and the sheriff's gun." "Mr. Wade! Mama!" Leanne came running toward them, her face flushed with excitement, her mittened hand held out. "Look what I found!" She opened her hand. Lying in her palm was a small, simple object gleaming in the afternoon sun. It was a ring, a simple, worn gold band. "I found it by the old tree stump," Leanne said breathlessly. "Where you said Papa used to sit and watch the sunset. Do you think it was his?" Melan's breath caught in her throat. Way had loved that spot. He'd lost his wedding band years ago, thought it was gone forever in the river. It could very well have been his, uncovered by the melting snow. "Maybe," Leanne said, her eyes wide with a child's magical thinking. "Maybe Papa left it for you, for when you needed to find it." Millen stared at the ring in her daughter's hand. And in that moment, in the midst of all the chaos and fear, everything suddenly became perfectly, breathtakingly clear. "Millen," Wade said softly, his voice full of hope. "I know I'm not Way. I could never replace him. But I will spend every single day of my life trying to be a man worthy of you and your daughter." Millen looked down at Leanne's upturned, expectant face. "Leanne," she said, her voice careful, "how would you feel if Mr. Wade became part of our family, for real? If he stayed here with us? Always?" Leanne's face exploded into a smile so bright it could have melted all the snow on the mountain. "Really? For always? He could be my papa?" "Yes," Melan whispered. "Yes!" Leanne shouted, jumping up and down. "He tells the best stories, and he makes you smile, Mama." Over their daughter's head, Wade's eyes met Melan's. They were filled with a question, with vulnerability, with a love so profound it stole her breath. "So," he asked, his voice thick with emotion, "what do you say, Millen Chen?" She looked from the gold ring, a gift from the past, to the man who was her future. The man who had brought salvation wrapped in danger, and had given her back a life she thought she had lost forever. "Yes," she whispered. Then louder, her voice ringing with a certainty that settled deep in her soul. "Yes, Wade Morrison, I will marry you." Dr. Finch let out a whoop of delight. "Well, I'll be, pardon my language, Mrs. Chen, soon to be Mrs. Morrison, but I think this calls for a celebration." As Wade pulled her into his arms, lifting her off her feet, and Leanne danced in circles around them, laughing, Millen felt a strength she hadn't known since Way was alive. Let Harrison bring his custody hearing. Let him try to take their land. They were about to find out what happened when you picked a fight with the hawk, and with the woman he loved. Together, they were stronger than any storm. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and ring the bell so you don't miss the next one.